I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I just set down my fork, folded my napkin, and told my son-in-law I'd be gone by morning. My name is Walter Reynolds. I'm 61 years old, and 4 months ago, my son-in-law looked across his own dinner table and told me that if I wasn't going to contribute like everyone else, maybe it was time I found somewhere else to live. I'd been in that house for 2 months. 2 months of cooking, of hauling groceries up from the car, of disappearing into the basement whenever they had company over. And for 2 months I told myself this was what family looked like now. Showing up, being useful, earning my keep. I didn't say a word back to him that night. I went down to the basement, packed the 2 suitcases I'd never fully unpacked, and at 6 the next morning I was gone before either of them woke up. 11 days later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Before I get into what happened, if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is right now where you are. I read every one of them. Let me take you back to the start, to a gray afternoon in March, the day I carried 2 suitcases into my daughter's house outside Barrie, Ontario. The drive up from my place in Whitby took just under 2 hours. I left at 10, deliberately, so I'd miss the morning crawl on the 404 and still get there with enough daylight to see the place properly. 31 years, running the parts department at a Chrysler dealership teaches you to plan things down to the half hour. You don't survive 3 decades of inventory counts and supplier deadlines without becoming a man who likes a schedule. I'd sold the house on Fennell Avenue 6 weeks before, the 4-bedroom where my wife Diane and I raised our 2 kids, the kitchen where she made her Sunday pancakes from scratch, never measured a thing in her life, the garage where her snow shovel still hung on its hook 18 months after the funeral, because some part of me kept thinking she'd need it come November. My daughter Lauren had called me in February. Her voice had that warmth in it I remembered from when she was small, asking, "Dad, why are you rattling around that big house by yourself? We've got the space. Come stay with us." And I believed her. I genuinely believed it was what it sounded like, my daughter wanting her father close. The house outside Barrie was a good one. 2 stories, a double garage, a backyard that backed onto a stand of pines. Her husband Craig met me in the driveway when I pulled in. He shook my hand hard, the kind of handshake a man practices in a mirror, and said, "Walter, glad you made it up okay. Roads weren't bad?" Lauren hugged me longer than I expected and walked me inside to show me the room. It was the smallest one in the house, off the kitchen, next to the laundry. Craig leaned in the doorway behind us. "Actually works out perfect," he said, easy, like he was doing me a favor. "Close to everything. Real convenient." I smiled and nodded. I thought he meant convenient for me. It took me about 6 weeks to understand he meant convenient for them. The first few days were fine. Better than fine. Lauren made a point of having coffee with me in the mornings before she left for work at the insurance office. And Craig, who managed logistics for a trucking outfit out of Innisfil, talked to me about hockey and the Leafs' chances that year like we'd always done this. I told myself I'd made the right call selling the house. I told myself this was what the second half of life was supposed to look like. Close to family, useful, needed. It was Craig who first asked me to start dinner the second week. "You're around all day anyway," he said, not unkindly. "Be a big help if you could get something going before we're home. Lauren's wiped by 6. I said sure, of course. I'd cooked plenty when Diane was alive. She used to joke I made a better shepherd's pie than her own mother did. So I cooked roast chicken stew, a pot of chili big enough to last 2 days. I didn't mind it, not at first. It felt like contributing. But by the 3rd week it wasn't a request anymore. It was an expectation, unspoken, the kind that settles into a household and becomes furniture. Lauren would walk in, drop her bag, and ask what was for dinner the way you'd ask a server. Craig started leaving notes on the counter. "Ribs Friday?" Like I was running a kitchen on contract. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I had time, and they had jobs, 2 young kids of their own from Craig's first marriage to ferry around, and I was glad to help. Then came the laundry. I'd started doing my own wash in the basement machine, no trouble there. But one Tuesday I came down to find a pile of clothes, not mine, sitting outside the laundry room door, folded into a basket like a delivery. Craig's work shirts, a couple pairs of the boys' soccer uniforms. I stood there a long moment looking at that basket. Nobody had asked me. Nobody needed to ask anymore. It had just been decided, somewhere upstairs in a conversation I hadn't been part of, that this was now mine to do. I did it anyway. I told myself it was a small thing. The basket came back the following week, and the week after that, By May, I was doing laundry for a household of 4, cooking 5 nights out of 7, and driving the 2 boys to their soccer practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays because Dad's stuck at the depot and Lauren had her book club. I want to be clear, nobody ever sat me down and asked if this was all right. It just accumulated, the way snow does, until one morning you look up and your car's buried and you don't remember it happening overnight. What got to me wasn't the work. I'd worked my whole life. It was the way I started disappearing inside my own daughter's house. When they had people over, Craig's brother and his wife, a few of Lauren's coworkers from the office, I'd hear Lauren in the kitchen saying, "Dad's just helping out for a bit," like I was a contractor between jobs instead of her father. I'd take my plate to the basement those nights. Nobody asked me to. I just understood, the way you understand a draft in a house, that I wasn't meant to be at that table when company came. There's a night in April I still think about. Lauren was hosting her old roommate from Western, a woman named Carol, for dinner. A proper sit-down thing, candles, the good dishes. I'd spent the afternoon making a roast and scalloped potatoes, because Craig had mentioned it was kind of a big deal, her getting promoted. I set the table, I put on a clean shirt, and at 5:30 Lauren came into the kitchen and said, gently, like she was doing me a kindness, "Dad, I think it'll just be easier if you eat in your room tonight. Carol doesn't really know you, and I don't want it to be weird. I want to tell you I said something. I didn't. I plated my own roast, the one I'd cooked for her dinner party, and I ate it alone at the little desk in my room, while I listened to Carol's laugh carrying down the hall. That was the night something in me went quiet, not angry, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a decision, though I didn't know it yet myself. Through May and June, I kept at it. Cooking, laundry, school runs for the boys, who I'd genuinely grown fond of. Tyler and little Sam, 8 and 6, good kids, always asking if I'd seen the latest Leafs highlights. I told myself I was staying for them as much as anyone. I told myself that's what grandfathers, well, step-grandfathers, but it didn't feel that way to me anymore. Did. It was Diane I thought about most during those months. What she'd say if she could see me, standing at that stove at 6 in the evening. An apron over my good slacks, listening to my daughter and her husband's car pull into the driveway, and feeling something tighten in my chest that I couldn't name yet, not knowing if it was hope they'd be glad to see me or dread about what they'd ask of me next. By July, Craig had started treating me less like family, and more like staff he didn't have to pay. He'd come home and ask, flat, no please attached, "What's on tonight?" If I hadn't started something by 5, he'd sigh. Not say anything, just sigh, loud enough that I'd hear it from the next room, and that sigh did more to me than any words could have. The thing that finally cracked it open was small, the way these things usually are. It was a Thursday in late July. I'd had a rough night. My knee had been bothering me for weeks, an old hockey injury from my 20s that flares when the weather turns. And I told Lauren at breakfast I wasn't going to be able to do the soccer run that afternoon, that I needed to see about getting it looked at. She nodded, said, "Okay, fine, don't worry about it." I came home from the walk-in clinic around 4 with a prescription and a brace on my knee, and found Craig in the kitchen, arms crossed, looking at the empty stove like it had personally offended him. "Lauren said you skipped the boys' practice," he said. "Not a question. My knee's been bad, Craig. I was at the clinic." He looked at me for a second, and then he said the thing I don't think I'll ever stop hearing. "Look, Walter, I get it. You're not as young as you used to be. But if you're going to live here, you've got to contribute like everyone else does. We're not running a charity." A charity. That was the word he used. Standing in the kitchen I'd cooked 4 months of dinners in. The laundry room where I'd folded his work shirts every Tuesday for 16 weeks straight. I didn't answer him right away. I looked at him a long moment, and something settled in me. Not rage, nothing that dramatic. Just clarity, the kind that arrives late but arrives complete. "You're right," I said. "I should contribute like everyone else. Everyone else who lives here pays nothing and does nothing they didn't agree to. I think I'll start there." He didn't have anything to say to that. I went down to the basement, sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, and then I called my old buddy Ron from the dealership, a man I'd known 30 years, and asked him straight out if his basement apartment in Whitby was still sitting empty. It was. Lauren came home around 6:30 and found me already packing. She stood in the doorway with her coat still on. "Dad, what is this? I'm going home, Lauren. Or somewhere that'll be home. Ron's got a place in Whitby. I'm taking it. Because of what Craig said?" "Dad, he didn't mean it like that. He's just stressed. The depot's been..." He meant exactly what he said, I told her, and I kept folding. And honestly, sweetheart, the fact that you're explaining it, instead of asking me how I felt about it, tells me everything I need to know. She didn't argue much more than that. I think some part of her knew. I finished packing that night, slept maybe 4 hours, and at 6 the next morning I loaded the car in the dark and pulled out of that driveway without waking anyone. I didn't slam a door. I didn't leave a note dripping with everything I wanted to say. I left a short one on the kitchen counter. Thank you for having me. Love you both, Dad. And I drove the 2 hours back down the 404 with the radio off the whole way, just listening to my own thoughts for the first time in months. Ron's basement apartment wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a window that looked out at ground level onto his backyard, but it was mine. Nobody's name on the lease but my own, nobody waiting on a meal. I bought myself a frying pan, a good knife, a coffee maker that did exactly what I told it to and nothing more. I made myself eggs that first morning and ate them standing at the counter, in silence, and it was the best meal I'd had in 4 months. I didn't hear from Lauren for 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, my phone started ringing. Once, twice. I let it go to voicemail, figuring it could wait. By that evening, there'd been 11 missed calls. By the next morning, the count was up past 20. I finally picked up on the 28th call, sometime around dinner. Dad, thank God. Dad, where have you been? I've been calling for 2 days. I've been right here, Lauren. I needed some quiet. There was a long pause on her end, and then it came out. Not an apology, exactly, not at first. Craig's mother had taken a fall, broken her hip, and was going to need help for weeks, maybe months. Lauren had 2 boys with after-school schedules running in opposite directions, a full-time job, and Craig working longer hours to cover for a coworker out on leave. The math of the house, the one I'd been quietly running for 4 months without either of them noticing, had suddenly become visible the moment I stopped running it. I don't know how to do all of this without you, she said, and her voice cracked on it. I sat with that for a second, because 4 months ago I'd have driven back up that highway within the hour. I'd have packed the car and told myself this was what fathers do. Lauren, I said instead, I love you, I will always love you, but I'm not coming back to be the help. If you want your dad in your life, not your unpaid cook, not your built-in babysitter, your dad, then that's a conversation we can have about what that actually looks like. Together, with Craig in the room too. She cried for a bit. I let her. And then we talked, really talked, for the first time in longer than I could remember. Not about who was making dinner, but about her, about the boys, about how tired she sounded, about how none of us had said a true thing to each other in months. It's been 3 months now since that drive down the 404 in the dark. I see Tyler and Sam most weekends. I pick them up myself. We get wings at the place by the arena. I watch their games from the stands like a grandfather instead of a man waiting to be summoned. Lauren and I talk most days. Craig and I are civil, working toward something better than civil. Though I won't pretend that one's healed all the way yet. I kept the basement apartment. I fixed up the little kitchen, hung a few of Diane's old photographs on the wall, planted tomatoes in pots out back because the landlord didn't mind. Some mornings I still reach for the calendar out of habit, half expecting a note about whose laundry needs doing. And then I remember there isn't one, and I make my coffee, and I sit by the window, and that's enough. I spent 30 years being useful to a parts counter, and 34 more being useful to a family, and somewhere in there I forgot that being loved and being needed aren't the same thing at all. I know it now. I learned it standing in a basement at 61 years old, folding my own shirts for the first time in longer than I'd like to admit, and feeling, for the first time in a long while, entirely like myself.